Well, just to get the ball rolling, Kyle, thank you for coming on my podcast. It's nice to see your face and to chat with you again. It's been a long time since our Chiang Mai glory days.
But I miss those days.
Yeah,
We had a lot of fun, and it is so good to be talking to you again because I feel like there's a lot of similarities in our philosophies and our values, and I've always enjoyed conversations with you, Zachary.
yeah, likewise, man, for sure. Yeah, and that's kind of you to say. Well, as I was telling you before we started recording, I think the main reason I wanted to talk to you today is because I've had some people in my life recently talk to me about anxiety, or to just tell me that they were struggling with anxiety. And it seems to be a topic that's in the news a lot these days, a topic that more people are talking about. And it's a topic, frankly, that I want to understand better. So yeah, just take this however you want, but I'd be really curious to know about your experience with dealing with anxiety and yeah, and what is it actually
Yeah.
like? Like what are the symptoms? Like what was it like?
Well, I think, yeah, one of the best ways to describe this and to show you how multifaceted it can be is actually to talk about our times in Chiang Mai,
Great.
because that happened to be, despite the lovely Thailand and the lovely moments, there was some high anxiety moments for me there. So I moved out to Chiang Mai in the end of 2014. And at the time, I had just started working for a startup. A little bit like in the years preceding this, some strange things had been happening to me. I'd been grinding my teeth a lot at night, which caused like these headaches. And yeah, like my jaw would start to pop, weird little things. I was a big rock climber and hiker, but at that time I couldn't hike more than a quarter mile without some serious knee pain. And yeah, I had this kind of low grade anxiety for, or maybe medium to high grade anxiety for just kind of perpetually. And
Can I just pause you right there?
of
Because
course.
people use this word a lot, and I genuinely want to know more. Like, what is it like? So you mentioned the grinding the teeth, but how else would this anxiety manifest itself? Like, how did you feel?
So I didn't connect the dots between grinding the teeth or the physical pain I was experiencing, but basically I would come home at night and I would just think, well, you're not a very good entrepreneur. You're not doing enough. You're not working hard enough. This isn't going to work. You know, just these little ruminating negative thoughts that would put myself down and kind of, yeah, just saying all of the things, you know, that if you said to somebody else out loud, you know, you would get in a fight, or most people wouldn't stand for being talked to like that. Or at least what's happening is there's a feeling, and it's actually like a feeling in my stomach, like an uneasy, I don't know, feeling in the stomach. And then your brain, because your brain is just like, well, there's an uncomfortable feeling. So I'm going to make sure that like your brain will just tell the story of whatever that is. So for me, as somebody who wanted to break into entrepreneurship, grow my own business, travel, all those nice things, the thoughts that were coming to my mind were kind of like that. So moving forward, I'm in Chiang Mai, and I've taken on something that is extremely challenging. I just moved to a new country. I've lived in foreign countries before, but there's still like, you know, that's always an experience. I had just started working for the startup, and I was working remotely, and I was learning a brand new skill set within that company. So I was in a new company, learning how to communicate remotely, and then like mastering my actual job while being in another country, which was all pretty challenging stuff added up. And I would find myself kind of slipping into these strange mind states, you know, just getting totally like, I remember if I was producing a lot of content and writing a lot of articles to tell the story of the startup, but if I was a little bit behind on something, or if I had made a mistake, or, you know, I was terrified. Just if any of you listeners out there use Slack, the little click, click, click that happens when you hear a message, that actually like made my heart rate go up. I was afraid of hearing the click, click, click of Slack. And so all of this was happening, and I would just like fall into these kind of states of despair. And I didn't really understand why. I was trying to work on my mindset. When I was in Chiang Mai, I started meditating every day to try and change these things. And so, yeah, there was like, I was having a great time over there. And, you know, I had a lot of conversations with people about just like feeling, you know, the way I was describing. But yeah, it was hard for a lot of people to understand or resonate with. And I couldn't, I didn't fully understand, or I thought, again, I just like hadn't read Tony Robbins books or something to carry about my day with any, with any problems or something. So we'll fast forward a couple of years. I returned back to the United States, was working for several different companies. About 2 years later, and I guess about 2 years ago, at the same time, I'd been working for a company that teaches people how to give a great talk from a stage and how to get on the stage. And I was at one of these workshops, and it just so happened to be filled with health and wellness practitioners. And I sat across this table from this one woman named Dr. Grace Liu.
I'm going to pause you one more time. So we talked a little bit about this just in our private conversations, but I mean, over the course of the years of returning to America and, you know, leaving Chiang Mai and switching jobs and stuff, like, was anxiety still a problem for you on a regular basis?
Oh yeah, it was still persisting from, or like currently right now, or just as the story progresses. I mean, it was still happening. As I returned, I found out I had a thyroid issue. Later on, through about 2 years of like learning about this and kind of delving into this area, turned out I had an autoimmune disease called Hashimoto's, which has, I think, has various like physical and somewhat metaphysical roots, which I'll break down in a little while. But this was the source of a lot of my anxiety. It was creating a lot of this anxiety. It was creating a lot of fatigue. I had lower energy. My body was just basically attacking itself, and it was attacking itself, so it didn't give it a chance to heal or regenerate or recuperate, which is why some of this joint issue stuff was happening. And finally, like all of the pieces, just getting diagnosed was actually amazing news, because it went from, I have no idea what's going on, I'm crazy, to, oh, there's a single source, you know, for this. So anyway, this is when, after kind of 2 more years of figuring that out, this is when I came across this doctor who was helping people overcome chronic autoimmune conditions through gut health. And instantly I understood a lot about her, because I had been experiencing a lot of the pain that she helps with. And so I was like, wow, so your customers must think like this, talk like this, they try and do this, but that happens, basically describing my own life. And she was like, you need to come work for me. So we worked out an arrangement where I was helping her with her storytelling, putting together great sales pages, presenting, and promoting her programs, which I was really good at helping her put these things. She's just absolutely brilliant, but has a difficult time putting her brilliance into plain language. And on the other end of that, she was helping me with my health issues. And within a couple of months, a majority of the anxiety that had been plaguing me, that I thought was just mindset issues, had faded away. And this is something that I didn't for a long time connect anything like with diet or health and my anxiety levels. I thought it was totally just a mental problem and a mental game. And as soon as I got, took the first steps to handling some of those issues, the anxiety melted away. And there just wasn't, what was amazing when I was feeling that feeling in my stomach that I was describing earlier, that uneasiness, that was my body telling me, hey, there's like, you're under attack. This is like, I'm not healthy. I don't feel good. But my brain, I didn't understand that at the time. And so nowadays when I feel anxiety in these ways, I can think to myself, I don't think, oh, you're a bad entrepreneur, or at least I try not to. It's hard to always be kind and smarter than your feelings. But nowadays I'm like, well, this is just, I'm not all the way there. My gut's feeling a little weird, but I don't have to like attack myself because I feel anxiety.
I see.
And so that's one element to kind of the roots of anxiety that I've discovered is very much health based. And I think just a lot of what we do these days, and how we live and how we eat, and just the products that we use in our daily life and our habits. Though I love modern technology and modernity, I love being able to Skype with you, and I love being able to go down the street and, get a chicken sandwich or whatever, super easy. But it's not quite, the way the world's set up isn't quite optimized for actually how our bodies and our lives are set up. And there's a little bit of a difference between, what's set up for a world where, it's more economics and growth and money, and our body kind of needs a different kind of nourishment. And so mastering can really difference in your levels of anxiety, and how clear your mind is and how productive you are. And then the other element to this, that one of the reasons I think I had this autoimmune condition is, and this is surprising as somebody who literally like professionally helps people write great talks, webinars, presentations, and market themselves. I actually discovered also in this time that I had a really difficult time fully expressing my authentic voice. And just who I am, speaking my truth, either confronting people saying, hey, this is my needs, this is who I am, this is what I think. A lot of time I spent a lot of my youth and growing up kind of not exactly feeling safe to express myself and express all these ideas kind of unfiltered and authentically. And I think it's no coincidence that the thyroid happens to be in your throat, and that I was blocking a lot of my speaking and my story and who I am, which has been another thing that I've been working on over the last 2 years or so, is working on being able to really first understand my truth, because I think we spend so much time growing up, trying to understand ourselves, but also trying to fit in a world where there's a bunch of different expectations. And I think many of us have a difficult time separating who we are and what the world expects of us, which is one of the reasons I love traveling so much, because it totally puts you in a new mold and you get to see where the boundaries of you are and aren't. But so I was learning that, and learning to see, okay, this is what I really want. This is me. And then learning to have the courage to say that and share that in terms of when I'm working with clients, or when I'm working in my job and I need something from my team or my boss, or in relationships when maybe I'm not comfortable with what's something that's happening, or I want something to change, and just being able to honestly and put it out there. Also online, and sharing who I am. Again, with some of these mindset things, I run into a lot of common traps, like, oh, well, you don't have anything, like, you've got some good skills, but you're not that innovative or not that different. So, you don't have something super unique to add. And so I would, just not spend as much time getting out there and creating and putting myself forward for those things. And I really believe, though, I've done a lot physically to improve my health over the last couple of years, working on this mindset and being able to really fully embody who I am and then share that completely, I think is the avenue to for full healing of this.
Yeah, I want to come back to that, but I want to go back to, a little bit earlier, 2 or 3 years ago when you started working with this doctor. I'm curious to know what exactly you were doing that really made the difference in terms of your anxiety starting to lessen. Was it simply things like taking probiotics or changing your diet or anything like that? Because just personally, I mean, I don't think I've struggled with anxiety to the extent that you did, but I've been traveling a lot lately, and it's, as you know, in Asia, it's a wonderful place with all kinds of, rice and noodles and bread. And I love all that stuff. But personally, just when I stick to a very low carb, sort of paleo-esque diet, not drinking very much alcohol, not eating very much sugar at all, pretty much zero sugar, just everything feels better for me. My energy level's more consistent. I can think more clearly. I can handle just about anything life throws at me a lot easier. So as you're speaking, I think, at least in my own life, that's kind of what I figured that works for me. However, I'm well aware that might not work for everyone, certainly. So what practically and specifically were you doing that really started to make the difference with your anxiety?
Yeah, you're definitely one step ahead of me on that. As far as like personal changes that I made, as soon as I discovered I had Hashimoto's, I immediately switched to a gluten-free diet, which at first is not the most fun or the easiest. I must admit, I miss drinking a beer every once in a while. Thank goodness there's, I don't know if you've been over in the West these days, but they've come out with this new beverage called White Claw, or they have a bunch of different alternatives, but it's just hard sparkling, hard seltzer water.
Huh.
And people are going crazy over them here. They're super duper popular. But anyway, so that's a nice alternative to a beer. But yeah, I cut out gluten. I've tried to dramatically reduce the amount of sugar that I take. I cut out dairy, but I still every once in a while, like I cheat a little bit on sugar and dairy. And then there were other things, as far as like what I restrict. I've also tried to avoid soy, which would be very difficult in Asia. But and some of these are just based on kind of my body composition and what was happening immediately to me. But I think for the most part, it's a pretty safe bet that gluten, dairy, and at least cow dairy, because it has a certain protein that we completely break down, or maybe the processing methods of wheat and dairy these days are just not optimal for our own health. So I cut all of those out. I also, as you saw, some of the things I did that were really interesting and really powerful was I got a lot of different blood tests. So I started to be able to see, okay, I'm low in vitamin B or vitamin D, or these hormones are, overworking and these ones are underworking. And I started to get a little bit of clarity on kind of the subtle things happening in my body. And then we went on to probiotics and other supplements. Once we understood, kind of got a layout of like, this is what's happening, so we can take probiotics and supplements to aid and work through these. So, but I think, some of the diet changes, and then starting to change the composition of bacteria and little microbes happening in my body and in my system. It was a huge change. Just being able to, again, we found some of the vitamin deficiencies in my body, started supplementing those, and then my body was able to like take care of itself and balance itself out a little bit better again. And again, within 1 month, it was like 3 months was just the hugest, most night and day difference in my life. And it's absolutely like, at first it was kind of a pain. I had to clean out my pantry and had to change my habits, and I couldn't go to some of my favorite places to eat anymore, but it's been a night and day difference. And I wouldn't trade a slice of pizza for how I feel ever.
Yeah. What about other than diet? Are there any? I mean, I know you're really big into rock climbing, and I see you on Instagram hiking to all these places, and you're a very physically active guy. But are there
Mhm.
any practices along those lines, or anything else you do on a regular basis to kind of keep those demons at bay, so to speak?
I'm pretty particular about sleep these days.
Mm.
I'm pretty much a grandpa. I like to be in bed by 9:30, and I typically wake up around 6 a.m. most days. But I like to try and get a lot of sleep in. And I think that makes a big difference. Doing some of these dietary things will help with the quality of your sleep as well. Maybe surprisingly or unsurprisingly. And also, I've been doing, again, different mindfulness practices. One of the things I really, really enjoy these days, which if I'm feeling anxious, if I'm feeling crazy, is Wim Hof breathing, where I'm not sure if you're familiar with the practice, but basically you get a lot of oxygen into your system, and it can create these somewhat like it feels psychedelic in its own right. And within 15 minutes, you can go from not feeling very energetic to like at least having enough energy to be like, I can carry on, or from feeling pretty stressed to like, okay, I can handle it. Within 15 minutes of this breath work, you can totally alter your state of mind and how you feel. And so that's been really good for just some immediate or short term kind of transformation. Another thing I've been reading, which I think has been good and helpful, is a book called Self Compassion, where and one of my favorite tips from this book, which will be good for the whole audience, is just imagine like a friend of yours who's known you your whole life, who understands all of your strengths and weaknesses and all of the victories and tragedies that has happened to make you who you are and bring you to this point. And this person is, totally understands you and feels for you. And if like, imagine what this person would say when you're feeling down. And usually it's, you've got to be compassionate to yourself. And it even, like, it feels awkward, like repeating what I would say in these situations, because again, our society isn't really set up. It's like a little bit taboo to try and take care of yourself. But if you imagine this person speaking and being like, hey, Kyle, I know that it feels hard right now. I know that this and that is scary, but you're awesome, man. You've done a lot of these things. You've come through similar things before. You've done all this, and you are amazing and strong, and just kind of like listening to yourself and kind of giving yourself the advice and support that a lot of us so desperately are looking for. And that's been a really big help for me in the last couple of weeks as I've been reading through this, and of course, just being an entrepreneur and growing your own business and doing all of these things, certainly anxiety and challenges and uncertainty are going to crop up if you're moving forward and advancing yourself. So you've got to have active self-care practices to be able to get through those, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, as long as we're talking about mental health, I feel like every time I'm talking to someone based in the US, I ask this question. So forgive me if anyone listening has heard me ask this before, but, and we don't have to talk politics at all, but, just the news. This is something I've struggled with in my life, especially when I was living in North America, where, I mean, I was a complete news junkie, following politics all the time, watching and consuming way too much news. And frankly, I think whether you're on the left or the right, so much of the news is pretty depressing and dark and not particularly uplifting these days. And I found at certain points in my life, my love of politics and even my love of history at certain moments wasn't exactly serving me that well. So just as someone who's lived abroad and has experienced different lifestyles and all the rest, I mean, what is it like to live in quote unquote Trump's America these days, just in terms of the news cycle? And what are your thoughts on tuning that stuff out or paying attention when it's necessary? Or, I mean, how are you kind of dealing with that?
I minimize the amount of news that I take in. I pretty much I watch maybe like 20 minutes of it a day, but that's probably still too much. Again, with like when I was saying like the world isn't really up for our well-being. Modern, one of those things. I think the way the news is distributed over TV is kind of a dying industry, and everybody on TV news. It's like not a good format to explain complex ideas like what's happening in the United States, or the divisiveness, or climate change, or immigration, or whatever these things may be. Most of the time it's like you bring on an expert and they get 45 seconds to say their piece while the announcer is berating them, at the same time. And that's just not a good format to explain these really nuanced ideas. And I think also when we go on to online news, a lot of people aren't setting up articles and information to tell the truth. They're setting it up to get clicks, which means the way that your headlines are written aren't going to be truthful, or they're going to be directly targeting your emotions. Anything you see on TV, any news article you see in your Facebook feed or whatever, if it makes you feel emotional at all, then that's by design. Somebody like me, some asshole like me, is thinking about, how can I get more clicks on this? And if I say, I could say, it was a normal day in Wisconsin and it rained a little bit, or I can say, is this rain because of Trump? And then everybody's like, wow, and you get people in, and so and on top of that, like I think news is one avenue of this, but things, just all kinds of TV shows that are just meant to kind of keep you engaged like that, or being on your phone scrolling through your social media, or being on video games, or whatever the case may be. It's just meant to like hook you in, keep you passive, keep you consuming. But a lot of these things are set up to make us feel anxious and weird too. And so what I think, as far as that, I try to be skeptical and to minimize a lot of those things in my life. And at the same time, as far as kind of like the mental health and the psychological effects of it, I try and just remember, and I think this is something that we desperately need across the world right now, because I think what's happening in the United States, though, very loud and obvious, is not necessarily unique in the world. I see this kind of stuff happening all the time, but just remembering that we're all more similar than we are different as humans. And I think most people basically want the same thing. They want to, live a somewhat decent life with maybe, it would be sweet if you could have a little bit extra money than what you need to cover the wage, and, have somebody to love, and maybe have kids or something, if you want. But it's like pretty basic stuff. And just making sure that you can lean into that and remember that we're all humans here, is a big thing for me in this time where it's so easy to just write off, oh, well, this person is just a Trump idiot douchebag, or that person's some liberal snowflake jerk or whatever. It's not helpful to be so adversarial anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know about you, but I've noticed a direct correlation between my mental health and my time spent looking at my Twitter timeline. I've basically cut that down to maybe 5 minutes a day, like maybe 5 minutes a day. And same with the political stuff. I just don't invest the time anymore. And I love this line. I believe it's Jack Kornfield, the Buddhist teacher. He says, "Tend to the part of the garden that you can touch." In other words, you don't have to take on the world's problems, and you can stay engaged and stay involved and make whatever dent in the universe you want to make, but actually do something, like actually get your hands dirty. Ranting on Facebook is not going to help anyone. In fact, it's probably going to make people's lives worse in many ways. So yeah, I try to remember that line, like tend to the part of the garden you can touch. Every time you're feeling energized or animated about a certain news story, or, anything in the news or politics or whatever, actually channel that energy into something productive. And there's ways to do it. It doesn't have to be this abstract thing. There's concrete ways you can do that. switching focus a little bit, another thing I want to talk to you about is storytelling, because I know that's one of your big interests, a big part of your brand and a lot of the work you do. Why is good storytelling so important for both businesses, but I'm more interested in just for every person, whether it's an employee or just a person in a relationship or just thinking about ourselves in terms of our stories. Why is good storytelling important? And what makes a good story, do you think?
Yeah. So as far as business goes, or we'll go from business down to personal, but why a business needs a good story is that stories are just the way we tell stories is an ancient and kind of well-worn mental path. It's like the Grand Canyon in our brains of how we process information, where we've just evolved to be able to listen to stories, make sense of them, and remember them. And there's certain elements of that that are just part of the business. A lot of the times we're so immersed in our expertise and what we're doing and how we serve people that we dump a whole bunch of information, way more than an average story, and it ends up confusing people and not being sure where they fit or why it's important to them. So a good story really helps you just like, this is why I care, this is why I'm different, and this is what you're going to get if you work with me. So being able to show that to them in a way that's not just saying like, hey, look at me, I'm so cool, but allowing them to kind of see themselves in the result in a way that's non-threatening and non-salesy and non-sleazy. As far as personally, a story within, for yourself, for explaining how you're operating or sharing with your team, this is also really powerful. You want to be able to make sense and say, hey, we've got a purpose here. We're trying to help this kind of people and make this kind of impact in our life. And so what that looks like is going to be A or B or things like that. You want to get people enrolled in your vision and enrolled in what you're doing and really wanting to work alongside you and support that. It also creates meaning in your own life. If I'm just working to make enough money to cover my credit card bill, I think in a certain way. But if I really want to make a serious impact and, want to change the way that America perceives healthcare or, change, have a really big, audacious vision for where I'm going with this, then I'm going to aim higher than just I've got to cover the credit card bills. I'm going to take bigger risks. I'm going to make bigger investments. I'm going to see a deeper meaning when I get knocked down in the inevitable challenges that will come with life. If I have a good story and a good meaning and a good purpose, then I can persevere. Just like there's I think the people who have done great and challenging things like a Nelson Mandela type comes to mind right now, where, he was in prison for a long time. And if his story was just like, well, I just got screwed by these jerks, then it wouldn't have turned out so well. But he had this bigger vision and this bigger purpose that kept him focused through all of those challenging years. And you can create that same effect by really having a mission and a purpose and a storyline to what's going on in your own life. And even as we get on a deeper level, just understanding storytelling in terms of your own mind and the dialogue that's happening, understanding how your brain is creating stories and interpreting things, and just being aware, like I was saying earlier, when I felt the kind of the anxiety in my stomach earlier, I thought it was because I was a bad entrepreneur, but as I grew and developed, we started to discover it was gut dysbiosis. And so being able to change those stories on just a micro level can have huge impacts on your quality of life.
And in your mind, this might be a difficult question to answer generally, but what makes a good story? What are some elements of a good story?
So there's a couple of key elements. One of the first things, and this is kind of a businessy oriented perspective on story, but we want to first of all, we want to explain why we care in this story. We want to be able to show why we care. We want to be able to put another one is the story even if it's told, even if you're telling your story, the story is not about you. It's about your listener and their experience. As somebody listens to your story, they're going to be imagining themselves in your shoes and experiencing the world as the protagonist. If you're telling it from your case, or if you're like, well, I worked with this client and they did this. But what you want to be able to do is show them a path to success and the result that they want. And instead of talking about, well, I'm awesome and I did all of these things, you're kind of telling a story about, well, Phil never thought he could change his diet. And so, but with a couple of small tips, he was able to navigate this difficult and challenging world and find a better result for himself. And so by sharing these kind of stories, they become teaching or they feel like teaching, and people will lean into them instead of like just being salesy and offering like, hey, I'm so great, I can get these amazing things for you. Another good element of a story, I think, is vulnerability. It's being able to show like, hey, this person was feeling like this, or, being authentic and showing, hey, I was going through this really hard time here, so that people can connect with you on a deeper level. People are listening to stories for, to make sense of things and to get to know you. You want to teach about yourself in a way, again, that's not like inflating yourself, but showing your own unique perspectives and ideas within that, and showing why you're motivated to help people in the way you are. Again, it's hopefully not just about being able to make a bunch of money in the short term, but you want to make an impact and leave a legacy. And so great stories can show you.
Absolutely. That's well put. Has any of what you've learned about storytelling and good storytelling and just the principles of empathy and vulnerability, has that impacted your relationships in any way? Like, do you take any of these lessons into your relationships?
Definitely. I think I experience a lot of these same things in relationships where again, like one of the first things, just like I do with my going back to that feeling in my stomach of, is it I'm a bad entrepreneur, or is it gut dysbiosis? On that same level, when you're in a relationship and somebody does something and you start no matter how we all grew up and we all came away with some kind of scars and neuroses and weird stuff going on, and that stuff like resurfaces throughout our lives. And so your partner could be doing something that is totally innocuous, but it ends up like triggering you in some kind of way. And so with storytelling, you can, and this is partially storytelling and partially, if you're noticing, you can be like, oh, like I'm telling this story, this person, she said this to me or made this like side comment that, and I'm interpreting it as an attack. And you can say, the story I'm telling myself right now, what I'm seeing and what I'm looking at, and you can start to observe and be mindful of the dialogues that are happening is looking like this, and just have that kind of conversation. Or also when you're telling your story and your own perspective and your point of view, being able to describe your feelings and telling a story from where you're coming from, instead of saying like, you make me feel like this, or you did this and so that makes you bad. It's like, this is my experience and this is how I saw this. And it's the same things. It's showing, okay, this is why I care in this situation. This is my point of view and what I think is important. This is where I want to see us going. But yeah, I think not as less so as far as like terms of specific tactical structural of storytelling is not as important as I think the mindfulness and being aware of the interplay of your emotions and your thoughts and how those things are coming together while interacting with your partner is very valuable.
Yeah, that's great. It's like our inner storyteller can be full of shit sometimes, right? And it's good to keep an eye on him and make sure he's not
Oh yeah.
steering us
Oh yeah.
down the wrong path. Yeah.
If you're not writing your story, somebody else is writing it for you.
Right. Yeah, that's well put. Coming back to something you said earlier that was interesting to me and I'd like to know more about. When you were speaking about finding your voice, so to speak, more and getting more and more comfortable in your own skin and more comfortable putting yourself out there and being more vulnerable and, sharing your podcast and gaining more confidence. I mean, what helped you on that path? Was there any teacher or book or was it just a gradual process? Like how do you think you've become more comfortable doing that?
I think in some ways I've become more comfortable with myself. One of the things I've done is I've stopped, or I still do this. I must admit, but like I've tried to reduce the amount I compare myself to others. I see other people, maybe, and this is such a common, silly human thing, but like in a day, I can go to the gym and like see somebody rock climbing way harder than me and be like, oh, I'm not doing enough rock climbing. And then I hop on my social media and somebody, has this bigger, nicer business than me, or, they have these, maybe I like walk down my streets these days and I see nice houses and I'm like, I want this. And there's all this self-comparison. And starting to cut that down and to really just love and acknowledge and admire who I am and what I'm bringing has been a big one. And then starting to see like what's really important to me and sharing. It's been a slow transition from when I started with the startup I was working for. It was very much like when I'm writing, it's very much information. Here's steps 1, 2, 3 to improve your marketing. And now I'm starting to share a little bit more of my emotions and my perspective and my ideas and stuff from my own story. I don't feel like I've fully achieved this. There's actually this interesting conundrum that I'm working through right now, because I feel like with my podcast and with my agency and with a lot of the work I'm doing, I do really well when I'm in a room full of people, a physical room full of people speaking from a stage, or in other cases a webinar. But my digital presence hasn't been so good. I don't like going on Facebook very much or creating Instagram posts anymore. And there's part of me that feels bad for it. As a marketer, I feel like I should have, this big social media presence that I use to promote my blog and my books and my podcast and my services as well. So I'm still trying to figure that one out, and maybe it's a matter of hiring somebody that can manage those aspects of it and take what I'm already over a podcast and over my books and in my own thoughts and just repurposing it onto those. But yeah, there's so many like cases. I don't post on social media very much, but every once in a while I'll write a couple of paragraphs about my perspective, or try to write something inspirational and helpful, and I still kind of have this voice in me that's like, nobody cares, nobody wants to hear that people reach out after and are like, hey, that really made an impact, thank you for sharing something that is the opposite of a lot of the news and negativity and kind of anxiety provoking things, where I just try to create something a little bit valuable and sharing my own perspective, and people are grateful for it. So it's a matter of changing my own story still about what I feel I have to say and how that will be received, and then investing the time into really growing those presence on those platforms. But again, like, I don't know if I really want to do that, because then that means I'm spending more time on these things, and so I haven't figured that one out yet, to be totally honest with you.
Neither have I. It's funny. I struggle with the exact same thing. I have such an ambivalent relationship with social media, just in general. I mean, on the one hand, I get how it can be insanely useful and help you build connections with people, and be great for your business and all the rest. But I don't know. I'm so leery of being just another douchebag on on Instagram posting about how great his life is, or coming across like I'm trying to be, you know, uh, arrogant about my lifestyle or me, or trying to sound like I've got it all figured out. I don't want to be another one of those, lifestyle, look at me, I've got it all figured out gurus. The internet, surely to God, has enough of those people. So it's, yeah, if
Mm-hmm.
you figure it out,
Mm-hmm.
let me know because I'm
One of
doing the
the
same thing.
One of the things that just came to mind, it's so strange these days because like 10 years ago, this was pretty much before like iPhones were a thing. I was traveling through Chile and Argentina, and I had this tiny, basically iPhone sized point and shoot camera. And back then I loved to take pictures. I'd take pictures all the time, didn't mind taking selfies with my friends. I'd take a lot of videos, and I'd splice together these little like kind of videos of whatever I was doing traveling. And I had a great time with it. And these days I'm like, because there's so much of that happening, I like feel guilty taking selfies, or like, and maybe this could be the storytelling thing. Like this is probably my own, mental blocks, but like, I feel weird just like, yeah, trying to take the selfie there and not being right in this moment, because it's just such like a pervasive, crazy thing these days. And maybe we don't need it. Maybe there's plenty of other ways to get attention than social media. But yeah, it's such a strange transformation that's
And you
happening.
have to, I think, if we're being honest with ourselves, well, I can't speak for you, but for me, like, you have to be honest with yourself about, okay, what is my real intention here? Do I want more likes just for the sake of having those likes and those little, hormone boosts, or what do you call it?
Mm-hmm.
The hormone, what am I thinking of?
Dopamine hit.
Dopamine. Thank you. A little bit dopamine hit, or am I trying to make a, do something really valuable and make meaningful connections? Social media, man, it's tricky. The other thing too about
Mm-hmm.
the selfies, I completely feel you. I was thinking of this line. There's a fantastic American writer slash essayist named Fran Lebowitz, and she's famously old school. She doesn't have the internet, she doesn't have the computers, doesn't have a smartphone. And this writer was asking her, well, why don't you have a smartphone? She's like, well, you have a smartphone. Everywhere I go, everyone has a smartphone. If I need any information from that thing, or if I want my picture taken, or if I want directions, or if I want to order food, there's going to be someone in the room doing it. And that's kind of the way
Mm-hmm.
I feel about selfies too. Like any situation I'm in where I could possibly take a selfie, there's already somebody doing it, whether it's my girlfriend or whether it's whoever. So what's the point? Um,
Mm-hmm.
Before I let you go, I want to give you a chance to plug your podcast from it. So maybe briefly tell me about your podcast and tell people where they can find you on the web.
Sure. So if you want to find more of me on the web, you can go to thestoryengine.co. And my podcast is the Story Engine Podcast. That's also the name of one of my best-selling books, The Story Engine, which is all about an how-to story and then communicate that online through mediums other than social media, and use that to grow your business. I also have a new book out called Selling with Story, which is it's kind of like I would see it as the prequel to the Story Engine, where it helps you get clear on your story really quickly and put that into a reliable and scalable system to sell your product and get your message out there. So if you want to find me, I would love to see you on or checking out the podcast. Or I am on Instagram and on Twitter at Kyle the Gray, and you can find me there and communicate with me there. And anytime, like, I'm not on Twitter very much, but anytime somebody tweets at me, I'm stoked. And I'm not on. I am. I check my Instagram daily, but also if you want to connect with me there, I'd love to chat.
Great. Well, Kyle, thank you so much for doing this. Was great. And before I let you go, I'm going to do my corny thing that makes me happy. I don't know if anyone else likes it, but I often ask my guests to finish these sentences using one or two words, which is the first words that come to mind. Okay.
Great.
The thing I am most drawn to, or sorry, should I say the trait or characteristic I am most drawn to in the opposite sex is?
Trying to do something meaningful with your life.
So purpose. Interesting.
Purpose. Yeah.
I've heard women say that. I haven't heard a guy say that yet. That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something I'm looking for. I mean, in my current partner, because we have a similar vision. I guess in contrast to my last few partners, where they were beautiful and we got along really well and things were great, but I didn't see, our long-term lives kind of lining up in the long run, and so that was a big thing I was focused on. But yeah, I'm glad I have that now.
That's great. I would most like to be remembered as. First thing that comes to mind.
I guess, I mean, this is lame, but a storyteller would be that, or a performer, probably.
Love is.
It's trust, and it's letting go.
Well put. Thank you very much, Kyle. This was great.
Thank you so much for having me, Zachary. It was so much fun catching up with you, and thanks everybody for listening.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Humans in Love. If you'd like to learn more about my guests, my work, or you'd like to listen to back episodes of the podcast, please visit humansinlove.com. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to Humans in Love using your podcast app of choice. If you're a fan of Humans in Love, and you'd like to help keep the show going and help me spread the word, please take 30 seconds out of your day to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast app of choice. Before I let you go, remember that life is short, so let's make it count. And thank you, as always, for your listenership and support. I'll talk to you again very soon.